Happy Monday, everybody. Today I am gone, so your job is to watch this video to get your notes for the remainder of chapter 13, and then do the quiz that accompanies them underneath so I can give you some points. The rest of the hour is yours to work on either your next homework assignment or exercise 15. So let's dive right in. Yesterday, we talked about the structure of both the brain and the spinal cord. When we're looking at the spinal cord, a lot of the terms that we use to describe its geography are pretty simple, as long as you can keep your brain oriented correctly. Remember, in this picture, the posterior aspect is on the back or on the top, and then the anterior part is on the bottom. So when we're looking at all of these different parts, a lot of them are named using anatomical language. Also remember, the lighter colored areas are the white columns, and the kind of brownish stained areas are the gray areas of it. We also have this passageway right through the middle that's full of cerebrospinal fluid called the central canal. So collectively, if we look at all of those, we have the posterior white column, the lateral white column, and the anterior white column. We also have the anterior median fissure and the posterior median sulcus. And then we have the anterior or the posterior, lateral, and anterior gray horns. So this is going to become important today as we talk more about the function of the spinal cord. The spinal cord, remember, is where we have integration of our reflexes. So these are automatic responses your nervous system does to keep you safe. Things like withdrawing your hand from something that is burning hot, or if you step on a Lego, withdrawing that foot to keep you safe. We also have the white matter of the spinal cord to act as an information superhighway. If you recall from Unit 4, that white matter is white because it contains the fatty myelin wrapped around those axons, which makes the nerve conduction very, very fast. So the spinal column is continuous from the bottom of the brain all the way to the sacrum. And so these are continuous bands of neurons that we call tracts. Those that carry nerve impulses from the body up to the brain are called sensory tracts. And those that carry information from the brain back to the muscles especially, but to any organ or gland, are called motor tracts. And so these tracts, you don't have to memorize their names, but it would be helpful to know how they are named. And they're going to be named according to their location in the geographic spinal cord that we just learned about, anterior, posterior, or lateral, and by where they start and where they end. So the example here in our notes is the anterior corticospinal is in the anterior white column, and it connects the cortex, the cerebral cortex, which is in the brain, to the spinal cord. So this is going to be a motor unit because it starts at the brain and it goes away from the brain. So here is a picture of where these tracts are found. And remember, most of these are continuous all the way through the spinal cord. And we have red ones indicating motor tracts. So it usually starts in the brain: corticospinal, rubrospinal, reticulospinal. So all of these refer to areas of the brain. Some of them are very specific, even outside the scope of this class. But the reticular area, the vestibular area, the cortex, these are all brain's locations. And so they're named according to where they start and then where they finish. On this side, we have spinocerebellar. So we're going from the spinal column up to the cerebellum. So that is a sensory tract. And then you can see the spinothalamic. The thalamus is part of the brain as well. So these are mirrored on both sides. They've just illustrated the motor tracts on one side and the sensory tracts on the other, just for illustrative purposes. So when we have sensory or motor impulses, excuse me, they are processed in a very organized way. This way, the body can deal with huge amounts of information all of the time. And remember, as far as evolution is concerned, individuals that can accurately and quickly process information are more likely to survive and reproduce. So as humans, we have a very efficient and highly evolved nervous system. So first, the stimulus is detected by sensory nerves or organs. An organ could be like the ear or the nose or the eye. Then it's going to travel down a sensory axon to the spinal cord. Here, it could travel up to the brain, like when you smell something, it doesn't have to go very far to get to the primary olfactory area, where that part of your cerebral cortex thinks about it and tries to match it with known scents that you have smelled before. Or sometimes those sensations can be combined with other stimuli. Like if you're eating something, that smell might also combine with a taste or a texture that's coming from your mouth. So this will happen in the gray matter or in interneurons. And then finally, it could generate a reflex. Maybe you smell something that has a lot of pepper in it and it might make you sneeze, or you smell something and it smells, rotten or moldy and it might make you gag. These types of reflexes are usually really quick because they are trying to keep you safe. And so the reason that you have those types of responses is because the pepper is irritating you. Your brain thinks that it's dangerous, and so it sneezes to get rid of it. So those reflexes can be a response, but if there is more integration necessary, then the response will travel along the motor axons to create whatever muscle or gland needs to activate. So maybe it's a salivary gland, maybe it's telling the muscles of the mouth to chew, maybe it's going to activate the swallowing reflex. Whatever it is, those signals don't have to travel very far for those sensations in eating. When we're going further down the spinal cord, we do have specialized nerves called spinal nerves that are going to carry the signals into and out of the spinal cord. These are special nerves, and they will be named according to the vertebrae that they pass through. So you can say it's the C1 spinal nerve or the L5 spinal nerve. No fancy names here. But the nerves themselves have really interesting structures. They're going to connect to the spinal cord to two places, and we do have one on the left side and one on the right side. So you can have the left C1 and the right C1. The posterior root of each of them, the one on the posterior side of the body, nearer to the back, is going to contain the sensory axons. So that brings information in. Then any integration will happen in that gray matter. And then the motor axon will come out the front, out the anterior root. So let's look at a picture and see what this actually looks like. So you have some type of sensation. In this case, we're looking at touch receptors in the skin. So maybe like the example we gave in one of the crash course videos is there's like a little spider crawling across your skin. So you feel those sensations. It goes up the sensory neuron into the spinal cord through the anterior root. And some of it might go up the sensory tract all the way up to the brain. So you can look down and say, oh, there's something crawling across my hand. Other ones might go across an interneuron, and maybe it elicits some type of reflex, like you slap the spider away or you fling it away. Some of these reflexes are done right away in the spinal cord, and some of them do require a little bit of brain input. The autonomic motor neurons, if we have any of those reflexes, also begin in the gray matter of the spinal cord. But notice how that motor neuron goes out the posterior or the anterior side of it. Okay, so we're going to come in the back and we're going to go out the front. This is actually the same orientation as the diagram that we were looking at earlier. So remember, this larger fissure, this larger kind of crack is always at the front or the anterior side of our spinal cord. And so eventually that can make it all the way down to muscles, or depending on what the sensation was, it might trigger, maybe your heart rate speeds up. Hopefully it doesn't activate your bladder, but it could go to other muscles, glands, and nerves as needed. So another really interesting side effect of these spinal nerves is that they do have, if we go back for 1 second here, the posterior root has what's called a posterior root ganglion. Notice that there's multiple nerves that all kind of assemble here and can add their information together. So sometimes these aren't even areas of the skin that are right next to each other. Actually, if we look at like the C4, for example, it goes all the way from your back down your shoulder. Look at how large the areas of like L2, 3, 4, and 5 are. And so these areas are useful if we are suspecting spinal damage, because a medical provider can come and say, can you feel your toes? Can you wiggle your fingers? They can even pinch certain parts of the skin to test if that specific spinal nerve is working. And so it's really interesting that they can do this really non-invasive test just because we know exactly where the tracks go for each of those spinal nerves. So a really interesting neurological exam that is very, very common to be done. So another kind of funny thing about your nervous system is that instead of directly innervating specific organs, many of our organs are networked together in what we call plexuses. So this happens in our head, neck, and shoulders. We call this our cervical plexus, cervical referring to the neck region. The muscles of the arm, forearms, and hands all combine and are part of our brachial plexus. And then it does occur for our lumbar and our sacral and coccygeal areas as well. So again, if we ever have some nerve damage that is suspected, we have to think about where that occurs. Does it occur at the sensory neuron level, or does it happen closer to the spinal cord, or even in the spinal cord, where it really could affect a lot of different areas of the body? So generating reflexes is a really important function of your spinal cord, and it is how it helps maintain homeostasis. Remember that many of these reflexes you don't even notice. They're happening subconsciously, and things that can help your digestive system keep working. Things like making you blink or regulating your breathing pattern. A lot of these you don't even notice that they're happening. And we can also test our reflexes clinically to test again for nerve damage in the central nervous system specifically. So when you go to the doctor and they tap on your knee with the little reflex hammer, which we'll try tomorrow in class on each other, they're not really testing your leg. They're testing your central nervous system to see if there's anything going on with your brain, spinal cord, and those sensory and motor neurons in between. So we'll talk more about this in class tomorrow, but just remember that your spinal cord is where a lot of these reflexes begin. When we're talking about our reflexes, we have lots of different terms we can use about whether they can cross over from one side of the spinal cord, like left to right, if they go up or down the spinal cord, or if they are really, really localized. So you can pause this and write these down if you want. Again, we'll talk more about this tomorrow when we try out some of these reflexes. So the other cool thing about reflexes is they do change with age. There are some reflexes you only have as a baby. If you've ever, seen a newborn baby and you put your finger in their hand, they're going to grasp on it. That's actually a reflex. They also have a really big startle reflex. Many of these will change as you get older. Adult reflexes include that stretch reflex that we will have on the knee. We also have tendon reflexes that basically protect our muscles so that if the muscle becomes stretched, it will contract the antagonist, and so that the muscles aren't working against each other. We also have the withdrawal reflex that I've mentioned a few times, that if we have pain sensations or heat sensations, it will trigger you to pull that limb away to avoid injury or pain. And then the same thing happens to help you keep your balance. The two legs are going to talk to each other and allow you to have what's called the crossed extensor reflex. So one other really important thing I like to talk about with you guys as teenagers, almost adults, is protecting your brain and spinal cord. Spinal cord damage can be really, really severe and life-altering, and it will not repair itself generally. We don't have any reliable way to repair spinal cord damage, so it is permanent. With somebody has paralysis of a single limb, we call it monoplegia. Diplegia is 2 limbs, usually it's the legs, and quadriplegia is all 4 limbs. So what type of paralysis that you experience will depend on where in the spinal cord the damage occurs. The higher up it is, it basically eliminates any sensation or motor neuron pathways from going past that point. It's like you're disconnecting the body from the brain at that point. But many spinal cord injuries are only partial, like it might cut through the motor tract, so you don't have good muscular control, but you still have sensation, or vice versa. So the one important fact I like to point out here is that motor vehicle accidents are the #1 cause of spinal cord injuries, and the best thing you can do, make sure you wear your seatbelt. Drive at a safe speed, make sure you're not distracted when you're driving, and the most common type of human to get a spinal cord injury is a young male. So make good choices and don't risk your future. Okay, so that wraps up chapter 13. If you need to rewind and rewatch some of that reflex stuff, please go ahead. Otherwise, the rest of the hour is yours to work on the quiz below or exercise 15. Have a good day and reach out if you have any questions.